Okay, this is that Marshall 76. I'm going to do one more real playing test of it tomorrow, but I wanted to show the inside. This is that capacitor network you heard where I could select different bright caps. And as I mentioned, it was the worst possible way to do it as far as noise, you know, all these little noise antennas, but it got the point across. So I'll rescue all those caps. And I've got to go in here now that I'm sure that everything else is done with this soft bristle toothbrush and knock off all those little bits of flux. Stick to the board. Really sexy work. But you know, it's nice when someone gets something like this that it looks as good as possible, even if they never see it. But you know, these black fiberglass boards are fantastic, but it's like having dandruff, any little bits of flux that shoot off while you're soldering. One excess hole here and three there. Three there were in case we abandoned the master volume, but this one was an extra hole. I shouldn't have drilled this. If you're wondering what this is V2 with its cathode follower. And on the cathode follower, it has a lot of voltage, high voltage on the cathode and on the grid. And the first tube I had in there, which is a Mullard CV4004, died. All of a sudden the amp had no output whatsoever, and I went through to see what went wrong, and here, where I should have 200 something volts, I had 13. And that told me it was this tube. I don't know whether that tube died because of the high cathode voltage. I suspect not, because I've used the CV4004 in a lot of Marshalls and Voxes. I suspect what happened was I forgot to use standby when I turned the amp on, because I was going back and forth a lot. And what happens is, before the tube warms up, and this is the one amp in the one tube or tube type in terms of a cathode follower where you need to use standby in the stock amp, because at the moment that the B plus first flows from the solid state rectifiers, there is a lot of voltage on the grid, and the grid to cathode voltage can be exceeded very easily in the circuit. So I've added a little diode network there, which will hold the cathode to 10 volts and hold the grid to 10 volts until current starts to flow, at which point that diode is out of the circuit. So that's just a way to make these things last longer. And the Excalibur 15, I can't talk today, with the top boost circuit, we'll have the same thing, though done on the board, not added at the tube socket. It's nothing wrong with adding it at the tube socket. It's just a little bit more work to do and do neatly. But this looks strange, but is rock solid and sounds good. It makes the tube last. I've got my little trick on the normal channel covered, because I don't want to give out everything I do. You can see the winner of the bright cap competition for this amp. They're 500 picofarad. Now that's for this particular owner and the styles he's after. Your mileage may vary. See that video if you want to hear the other options. Everything else in here is very much the straight Marshall Superlead layout. I didn't change any values. Nothing in here is mojo. Nothing in here is promising something it can't deliver. Everything is chosen very carefully according to the current and the noise floor and the what I need a resistor or a capacitor to do. Notice on the plates, I've got these 2-watt Vichy metal films. And on the tone stack slope resistor, the same. The cathode there, I used a carbon film, but a 1-watt versus the half watts we have everywhere else. And then these droppers are 3-watt versions of that same Vichy. I really like those. Vichy bias caps, these are nice. This is the same cap that's going into the Park 150. I did change the diode layout in the bridge compared to a lot of Marshalls, because it makes more sense to me that that's the negative end, this is the positive end, this is where the two sides of the HT supply come in. That's my 50K mid spot with a little resistor on the bass side. So the bass response stays vintage, 25K, but the mids get a little bit more push. I like the sound of that. I was able to reuse the 56K originals there. I had to redo so much of this. See the previous videos. This has the improved ground scheme, which I'll be doing on the park as well. You can see the new 5.6K grid stoppers up in the air. We can just focus on those right here and there and there and there. These are 2 watts, not because there's any current there. I could have used half watts, but I chose them because I knew that I was going to be standing them up like this. And these 2 watts have thick leads, so mechanically that's very secure. There's not any wobble. It wants to stay there. Then we've got the 5 watt 1Ks. I replaced the old ones because they were drifting in value. Got the new master volume right next to the grids on the output tubes. Any potential noise from being so close to the speaker or the AC is eliminated by common mode cancellation. These 2 meg resistors or 2.2 meg resistors are there both to get the value back to the vintage 220K, but also in case there was a problem with the pot failing, there would always be a bias reference for the output tubes, which is important. It'd be cold as hell, but nothing would catch on fire. New fuse holders because one was a bad non-original and the other one was shot. I put in new screws which match each other to hold the IC jack in place. Originally this had one original one which didn't really fit this IC jack, and the other one was a sheet metal screw just going into the chassis, and that's not very good. You saw my video on the new plates here to deal with these large holes. So this is the master volume. And you've heard that. It sounds really good. This is the output impedance selector. It's set to 8 right now. 4, 16, 8. One change I'm going to make on these output tubes, so not output tubes, output sockets. Before I do button it up, the Marshall just has all the positives here, and the positives go to the center selector of the impedance selector switch, and all the grounds here. And that works fine until someone forgets to plug in a cabinet. What I'm going to do is cheap insurance on this, just to protect this valuable amp that the owner, it was intrinsically valuable, even though it had been butchered, and the owner put a lot of work into it. Let's keep it going. I'm going to disconnect this lug right here from the positive, and I'll put a new wire here, and then I'm going to tie this lug to ground, so if nothing is plugged into this jack, the output is grounded. So it is a load. It's like they do on fenders. So I'll show this video to the owner. If you're only using one of these jacks, use this one, just like on a fender. It'll just protect the amp from not having a load. And I'm going to do the same thing on the Park and on future Excalibur 15s after the first one. I've decided instead of having 3 output jacks for various taps and then having to use a resistor for protection, I'm going to put a 2-way toggle switch, just 8 or 16 ohms, 2 jacks, and then the same ground trick, just for protecting things. I'm trying to think if there's anything else in here I need to show. I've thought about changing the presence to the 0.68, but the amp does everything that we need it to do with that 0.1, so leaving that alone. You're going to get to hear this better tomorrow. I've got a friend coming over who's a pro player. He's going to put through some paces. You can see the shielded grids on the input jacks going where they go, and notice I have all the grids steered away from the heater wires. The black heater wires are the culprit for a lot of buzz in Marshalls. So none of the grids, even on the phase inverter where it doesn't matter as much, are crossing that black wire. And any wire that is crossing it, like this cathode here, or this cathode here, or this plate, These are not as sensitive to noise to begin with. Sorry about the shake there. And they are crossing at right angles. I have some non-conventional wiring on the input jacks. This is not how Marshall did it. Electronically, it is exactly the same. But I find this gives the best strength. Actually, some Marshalls had the input grid stoppers on the board, which is a terrible thing because you're routing those sensitive signals right past some noisy stuff with very different phase relationships. So doing it this way with the shielded wire and having the grid stoppers here eliminates a lot of problems. If this amp were higher gain, I would have additional grid stoppers right at the socket. If this were at 2203 or 2204 or more gain than that. But for a plexi, this is good. And as you could hear with that SG, which is a bright guitar, and I was sitting very close to the amp yesterday, there's no lack of treble response. So people say shielded wire robs your tone, it rolls off the highs, blah, blah, blah. It depends on what shielded cable you use. It depends on how long a run of that shielded cable you use. This stuff, yeah, you're losing high frequencies, but it's well above 16K. You're not going to notice you don't hear anything out of the guitar speakers much above 5K. And if you play these amps long enough, you yourself will not hear much above 1K.